everybody. Christina Previtt here. I am lead faculty for the Modern Management of the Older Adult with my partner in crime, Dustin Jones. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about power versus strength training. We are in week 3 already of the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. And actually, Dustin and I are going to be talking about Old Not Weak at CSM next month. Oh my goodness, I can't believe CSM is already next month. So if you are heading down to New Orleans in February, Dustin and I will be talking on the Friday. I'm going to get my words right, I promise. On the Friday at 11 a.m. and we are being hosted by the home health section. And our discussion is going to be on some of the practical applications around strength training in older adults with a really strong emphasis on practical scaling and progression depending on the health setting that you're in, as well as program design and treatment planning with the exercise focus in some of our community dwelling older adults or some of our homebound older adults. Dustin and I are going to kind of take opposite sides of the spectrum. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about power versus strength training. What you'll often see with a lot of the topics that Dustin and I talk about when we're discussing some of the exercise prescription principles with older adults is they look surprisingly similar to some of the things that I would think about if I was working with some of the fitness athletes that Ryan and Mitch and Zach often talk about. And I kind of love that because we're taking the foundations in exercise prescription and just applying them to a different population. And I think that if we can really master the foundations and the really core competencies around exercise prescription and design, we really can clinically apply those skills to multiple populations depending on what the underlying pathophysiology is going on with that individual. So today I was going to talk a little bit about power and strength. And the reason why power training started becoming popular when we were talking about some of our community dwelling older adults was because when we see with aging is a preferential loss of type 2 muscle fibers. So going right back to our undergrad in kinesiology, we know that our muscles are composed of type 1 and type 2 fibers. And type 1 are considered these slow twitch fibers, and type 2 are these fast twitch fibers. So these are the ones that act quickly and can be involved in reactive strength and quick dynamic movements. As we get older, we do see a preferential loss of type 2 fibers versus type 1. And the idea coming into falls prevention and increasing functional resiliency in our older clients was, is there an exercise modality that we can use that will allow us to try to mitigate those losses as much as possible to maintain reactive balance and have that potentially create a lower risk for falls and a higher ability to do our day-to-day tasks with our community older clients. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the difference between strength training and power training first. So when we're thinking about strength or what it means to be strong, it is our absolute capacity to apply force against an external load. And that external load can sometimes be gravity. If we're talking about a CrossFit athlete, it can be, a barbell. If we're talking about some of our day-to-day tasks, that can be our ability to pick up a laundry basket or a bag of groceries and bring them into the house. When we're talking about power, that is our ability to exert force against an external load quickly. So we are trying to quickly apply that force. And so there is a time component to that equation. So instead of force times distance, it's force times distance over time. And so that will kind of come into the foundation of how we will start to train power versus train strength. Okay, from a foundations perspective, when we are training strength, we are looking at biomechanical positions and completing a task. And we're not really thinking about the time that it takes to complete a task. And sometimes we can use the amount of time that we take to complete that task as a variable in our exercise prescription. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to use the example of a squat. So if I am asking a person to do a sit to stand or a squat from a strength perspective, I'm asking them to stand up and sit back down, really focusing on biomechanics and movement. Often when we're thinking about strength training, we're thinking about higher load, lower velocity. So we're having more external weight on us. So we're holding a heavier kettlebell or something, and we are going through that movement a little bit slower. When we are applying this to power, we're thinking lower load, higher velocity. So instead of saying, I want you to squat with as heavy a weight as possible for 5 seconds, it's, I want you to squat with as heavy a weight as possible, as quickly as you can, until your speed starts to slow down. And so that's what we would do with an older client. So we would have somebody who is competent in the sit to stand and felt safe in their ability to complete that task. And we would say, okay, now Anna, we are going to get you to squat down and stand up as quickly as you can for a set of 5. And that would be more preferentially activating some of those type 2 fibers. There was a recent qualitative study that was looking at the comparison between a high load, low velocity and low velocity, high load on older adults' perceptions of enjoyment of an exercise program on different dimensions around quality of life. And they showed a lot of similarities between the two. A lot of older clients, they liked both. But with the high load, low velocity, there was definitely an added level of fatigue compared to the low load, high velocity. So strength training tended to fatigue some of our older clients for longer. And I think that makes sense. It is a little bit more fatiguing to be holding onto something heavier than doing shorter bouts of high velocity, quick movements. When I'm talking to my older clients and talking to some of my clinicians, one of the things that they always ask us is, okay, so when do I do power training and when do I do strength training? Should I do both? Should I do one always over the other? And of course, it depends on your context. It depends on the amount of space that you have. For example, if I'm in a home health setting and I don't have a ton of weights, and my clients will max out on the weights that I have available, power training is another way to continue to develop some of those progressive overload principles and adaptations that I'm looking for while not changing any of the external loading. So it's another way that we can progress. But from a 101 perspective, when I'm thinking about when I'm going to apply a strength training program and when I'm going to apply a power training program, I pretty much think about first teaching the movement. Is the person able to complete whatever movement I'm trying to teach them well under slow speed, under low velocity first? So do they have the proper motor control? For a sit to stand, for example, are they not flopping down onto their chair? Because that's only going to be accentuated if we start adding speed. They're going to flop even more. So do they have the amount of eccentric motor control? Are they maintaining good biomechanics through the concentric and eccentric phase of that movement? And do they feel like they're safe and confident in that movement? And if their answer is yes to all of these things, then we can start differentiating some of the ways that we are progressing this program. So if I see a person twice a week, this is actually kind of similar to the conjugate method, I guess, if we're thinking about some of the comparisons to strength and conditioning. Sometimes I will use a strength-based prescription for day 1. So we'll try and apply, when they're fresh, try and add a little bit more weight or add more reps and volume to that session that I'm with them. And then if I see them the next day or a couple of days later in the week, then we did the strength focused session day 1. Then if I see them again day 4, for example, we might do more of a power focused session. So instead of fatiguing them again as they're just starting to recover, especially with our older clients, the recovery tends to be a little bit longer. we're going to be able to get them to still train this movement without the same level of fatigue. So the day 4 movement will get them, doing more sit to stand movements, but lower load, higher velocity. I'm trying to think with all my notes if that's kind of all of the comments that I wanted to make. Yes. Okay. I think that's it. So what are some other examples? So sit to stand is a nice example of how we can differentiate between a strength and a power movement. We can do it a little bit with some of our upper body movements too. Really any multi-joint or isolation type movement, you can switch the speed as long as biomechanics are staying sound. One of them that I would probably shy away from with our older clientele is any like deadlift or hip hinge pattern. I probably wouldn't get them doing more of a power movement. So I don't have very many of my older clients doing things like power cleans or speed deadlifts, or any sort of accommodating resistance, just because, especially in that hip hinge pattern, I find that trying to really dial in the biomechanics and the motor control of keeping a stable lumbar spine while being able to move through range is a high level skill, and it takes a little bit of time. So I don't usually do the power movements with the hip hinge. But other than that, like some of the things like a glute bridge, which is commonly used as a home exercise program, you can apply an extra weight to the hip, or you can start getting people to do those movements quickly, depending on their level of pain and irritability, if they have any low back pain. So you can get creative with it. I like the, sometimes the power training is really fun because it really mixes things up. It gets your clients a little bit more engaged. My older clients really like it. They tend to tolerate it really well. I'm always looking for biomechanics, and especially with potentially like a knee valgus for anyone with osteoarthritis in the knee or a degenerative meniscus injury. I'm always watching to make sure that they're not irritating something in their knee as they're performing some of these power movements. But it is a nice additional tool that you can use if you're looking for something to change things up and get a little bit more engagement. All right, that is it for today. If you guys have any questions about strength versus power training, or any really positive examples of how you've used this in a clinical context, I know that power training is really talked about in the athletic populations, but I think that we can talk about it in some of our older clients too. All right, hopefully I will get to meet all of you guys in person at CSM or at the ICE Sampler coming up in April. Dustin and I will be speaking there as well. So hopefully I'll get the chance to meet you all in person soon. Bye, guys.